This Step in STEM session, we're going to be doing something very different. It's going to be kind of a first for Step in STEM sessions. No presentation today, all right? Just pure interaction, but interaction through a different way. This is completely off script. There is no script. We're going to look at something that we all know and love. So with Step in STEM, there's STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. There's also politics. Today we're going to look at politics through a different way, though. So when you think about politics, what is the first thing that you guys think about? What first word in your head?
America.
America. Okay.
Parties.
Parties? Oh, okay.
Politics.
Lily, Arthur, what? Debates. Okay. And when you guys learn about politics or discuss politics with other people, what is the medium through which you discuss it? How do you discuss politics? How do you learn about politics? How do you read about it? Debates. Okay. So with other people, yeah. Maybe online, potentially. Maybe with people in your family, at the dinner table, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So there are all these mediums, but what I noticed is that there isn't a real hands-on approach to politics. There's a hands-on approach to engineering, hands-on approach to AI, as we've seen in many past Step in STEM sessions. There's even a hands-on approach to history, as we've seen with the Thucydides trap last time. But politics, not so much the case, apart from debates, as you mentioned, which is putting yourself in the shoes of the actual leaders in politics. So today we're going to be looking at some people who actually tried to define politics through a hands-on approach. We're going to be looking at, actually generally, when you define politics, you think about the political view, right? And what is a political view, in your opinion? What is a political view?
How the world should be shaped.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an opinion. It's your opinion. It's personal, right? And so by personal, we mean that it's subjective, right? It's not objective. And in science, in STEM, in general, we try to take things that are subjective and turn them into something that is objective, right? That's the whole goal of science in general. And applied science, applied math to other fields such as politics. And one question that's really important is, how do you define a political view objectively? Do you guys have any ideas? That's completely fine, because that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at a past way to define political view. Can you put it up, please, Eli? We're going to be looking at the ins and outs of the political compass. So the political compass, you can put it in full screen, is, so the political compass is this test, right, that has been devised by researchers and, political scientists over the years about how to objectively define your political view. So, we can define it kind of in a very broad way, but there's a mathematical aspect behind it, obviously. There's sort of questions that you need to answer. It's a regular quiz, but it's a very, it's acquainted by researchers and accepted by them. Now, why? What's the hands-on approach of this thing? Well, the hands-on approach is that I want each and every one of us right now to take this test and see what we get and see if we notice a pattern, all right? Potentially not. So, guys, can I have your attention? As you guys noticed, obviously, when you got your results, the political compass, the goal, right, is to kind of put you on a scale, right? And there are two things that differentiates, right? There's economic and social attitudes. We all know that, right? But this was, considered a big improvement because before the political compass was invented, there were other methods of, deciding and differentiating people based on political choices and views. So as you notice, there's two axes. There's one axis, which the economic axis, and it rates you from the right, which they say is neoliberalism. And so that's the view pretty much that like the free market is, you shouldn't intervene. There's no intervention and interference in the free market. And the state should not interfere in any aspect of the market and the economic, state, unless you absolutely need to. Well, that's the big issue here. Is that more democratic? Is it less democratic? That's the whole issue.
No, I mean, like, Democrats are more.
Well, the neoliberalists, which generally are on the Republican side. Free market.
People who run for president as a Democrat.
Yeah.
Are they more on the left or on the right?
Left, but they're not neoliberalist. That's what I'm saying. They're on the right. And, Yeah, and then, there's the polar opposite, which is socialism. We all know what socialism, it's the opposite. You should strictly regulate the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, on the social axis, so that's economic. Social, there's a split between authoritarianism and libertarianism. So authoritarianism, as we all know, it's a belief that, people should be obedient to authorities. Okay. All right. People should be obedient to authority figures and, respect them at all times. And so, obviously, liberalism libertarianism is the opposite. So it's more individual freedom, and that, in this case, is more democratic and more Democrat as well. And what's important is that you combine the social and economic scale, and you can find out exactly where you land. And so you differentiate between those who believe in left-wing economic policy and authoritarianism and social policy. So now we're going to go into the interesting part, the juicy part here. If we take a look at results, not of you, but of past actually surveys. So there's this survey by a bunch of Princeton students and Harvard students as well, and they took their surveys, and they took the results. And what do you think they found in the results, pretty much? There are 4 quadrants, as you saw in your results.
Everyone was left in the libertarian.
What? So green, that's, what is that?
Left and left.
Bottom left?
Yeah. Rich,
Yeah.
privileged kids are all left. Bottom.
Uh-huh. That's his opinion.
So
So what percent?
rich Texans are not very bottom left.
Okay, all right. So that may be a few. And they did that survey with people from Princeton, but they also did that survey from just random people online, which not necessarily fall into that category. So you think people from Princeton all fall on the bottom left? Well, that's true.
Go from you, Texas,
What percentage actually of people do you think fall on the bottom left? 82. Damn.
What?
Damn. 82%. 82% of Princeton students and Harvard students that took the survey fall into that. That's not all. 82% of anyone falls into that category. That's surprising, right? You think like Trump, you take Trump or whatever.
But our politicians.
What?
Our politicians are the top right. Versus like the Western world.
That's what I'm saying, but it's not just the Western world. Any person, on the earth, not any person.
Did they pass the test in China? You don't know.
Well, I assume so because they didn't restrict it solely to Western society, and they didn't only, put it online in English, etc. They put it through university and research institutions. So I'm not sure, but I assume so.
But
Yeah.
our politicians, the last 3 politicians, they kind of top right.
That's what they say. Absolutely. Now the big problem here, you lead me exactly to the problem here. What if we don't correspond with our politicians? Can you please pull up your results, Eli?
Yeah, I have it. Yeah.
Can you just pull it up? No, pull up your results, great. So Eli, for example, falls in right here. Now, that's not surprising. Once again, 82% in the whole quadrant. But you'd think, well, maybe you fall in here or here, etc., etc. Actually, if you look into those 82%, over 90% of those people that fall into this quadrant here fall into a more specific part, which is this line right here. Now that is tiny compared to the whole, political compass. That is absurd. How can we narrow down right here? The line. It's a straight line right here, and around 90% of the 82%, so the vast majority of people, exactly, fall into there. Western, non-Western, rich, non-rich, economic right, economic left, etc. Now, there are 3 main criticisms, right, and problems that we can make of, of this. First of all is biased questions, right? So, for example, non-political questions. You mentioned, our race is better, like a racist question, right? Things like that. Things relating to differentiating between art and economy, for example. Yeah?
You know, the political
Compass?
the
Quadrant?
people that are,
Yeah?
did they take the test or did people take it?
No, the people placed it.
Very interesting. Because, like, for
Yeah.
example, I'm not sure Trump would he took the test would end up full authoritarian or
Trump.
Trump is like top, right left.
There. Okay. Yeah.
Like that's very that's also
Well, yeah. So, yeah, that's a good point. But if we talk about biased questions, right, political bias, that's very important because that considers the quality of the actual questions. So, for example, one of the questions, you mentioned it actually earlier, Arthur, it relates to people's attitude about abortion. Now, this is obviously a very controversial topic. It's a taboo topic. And for the purpose of this test, it's actually a good thing. You want to talk about taboo things because the more something is controversial, the higher the rate of, the higher it facilitates to differentiate people on the political scale. So the word in this question, right, is word for word, whether abortion should always be illegal. So this includes situations, extreme situations like rape or, incest or whatever you want that's very extreme. And that's actually something that the majority of even pro-lifers would say will accept to be exceptions of the rule of abortion, right? So even if you are a pro-life, you may find yourself disagreeing with this statement and thus being moved downwards towards the more libertarian half of the chart. And the issue with biased questions is that they don't only affect the social questions. They also have a tendency to drag respondents to the economic left too. Take the very, very first question of the test as an example. So that asks whether globalization should benefit people or businesses. So the issue being that right-wingers, and even neoliberals actually, will generally agree that it does and will benefit humanity in general. Because if you had to choose, most people, irrespective of left or right, they would choose humanity, right? And as such, it moves them towards, once again, the left of the chart. Exactly. So essentially this problem is really replicated across the whole test. The whole political compass tends to pull people towards this left quadrant, with a number of questions which are actually seem to be designed specifically to push people down to this area. And the second criticism, on top of biased questions, is best demonstrated if you consider a question about whether you think abstract art is actually art at all. So this may indicate whether you're more deferential towards the traditional way of doing things, or perhaps more authoritarianism, or if you're accepting of the newer artistic styles. So the problem is that this is pretty removed, actually, from political ideologies as a whole. And so therefore, you could argue that there are definitely some more important factors to determine your ideological standpoint, which should be examined more clearly rather than through vague questions like about abstract art. And the test does quite a lot of these kinds of questions, non-political questions. But the problem is that they seem to be allocated the same weight to political questions, to questions that actually differentiate your political standpoint. So the question we talked about, racism, for example. If the researchers, in this survey, they took a test, and they took it twice. They answered every single question the same way, except for this racism question. And they put strongly agree and then strongly disagree, and they measured the difference. And the difference was around 0.5 of a point on the authoritarian axis. And they did the same for the abstract art question. And what do you think was the result? What was the difference? That's a problem. The exact same difference between racism and abstract art. Is that true? Is your view on abstract art as critical to determining your political standpoint as your view on racism? I think we all agree that that's not true. Yeah?
I just was saying top personal figures are not actually in the right quadrant, but they're not in the right spot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Why like Donald Trump
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So, as we mentioned, very important, controversial questions about race can be counteracted by a less meaningful question about abstract art. And yeah, once again, racism is much more important than abstract art. And so there are meaningful questions, there are less meaningful questions, and even these meaningful ones are worded in a way that point you toward the left-wing preference and pushes people to the left. So researchers also ask people to rate themselves in another way, apart from this political compass, the way that we all know, not necessarily love, the left to right one-dimensional scale, right? So from 1 to 10. And anyone who put 1 to 3 on this scale would be considered left identifiers, and anyone 5 to 7 would be considered, kind of on the right or so, and then extremists. So we mentioned that the test split the scale into economic and social axes, right? So if someone is a left identifier, they could be economically left but socially right, and economically and socially left. However, the one place we wouldn't expect these people to land on the test is the economically and socially right section, right? If we consider that they're left. So this the same, vice versa for right and left. What does the data say? What do you think?
there are more people who go right than there are left, right.
Yep. That's kind of the idea. 1% of all the left identifiers, they ended up in the top right segment. But a 39% of the right identifiers ended up right here. Not even the whole quadrant, in this specific line. Okay? So, yeah, that means that either one in four people, pretty much, which identifies right, are actually left-wing, and they don't know it. Subconsciously, they are left-wing. Or it means that the political compass has misidentified them as left-wing. So as I've explained, this misidentification could be down to leading questions, or simply that the movement to the right, either socially or economically, has been hidden through vague questions like the one on abstract art. And the fact that there's a large gap between self-determination and the political compass isn't all that surprising. What is weird, though, is that it's only for those who identify as right-wing. So that suggests that it isn't really just about people misidentifying themselves, but because if it was true, we'd see the same misidentification, of left identifiers, which would be placed in the right section in the political compass. That means, therefore, that the political compass may not be as good at measuring political positions as we once thought. But we also know that the standard right to left one-dimensional scale is not that good either. So right now, we've seen essentially two things. We've seen that there are, first of all, different ways to identify political positions, and we've seen that this way is wrong, or at least not accurate. Now, why? We've examined that. The more important question is how we can make this better. What are the problems in here that we could fix? That's why I want all of us to think together about a way, either to change this test, take this test and just change it, tweak it a little bit, or create a whole new framework or mechanism to determine one's political position. So what are your ideas? Yeah.
Does that line, bottom left, middle, does it extend to the top right? Is there a lot to the top right as well?
No, it's not even on the bottom left. It's here to here. Yeah, which you fall right in. Actually, what are your results, guys? Do you fall into this?
A bit more right.
A bit more left? Okay, all right. A bit more to the right? Okay, and you? All right. All right, so you're still in this. Actually, do you have a... Okay, sorry. You? I like that, yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so there's this line here, and you guys essentially fall into this right here, right? So once again, we mentioned how this is not accurate, and we mentioned how all these political leaders seem to not agree with us, the people, or they should be representing us. So what are you guys' ideas on making a test that's better? Is what?
It's inconsistent.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know if they end up with it actually.
Oh, absolutely.
And also, I mean, for left or right is very subjective as well. Depends on, for example, if you're left in France, like extreme left in the US, if you're like left in the US, you be like center in France. Like it depends on the perspective a lot. So it's complicated to judge based on the observant. To have those results is
Okay, that's an interesting point. You mentioned the notion of left and right is subjective, but don't you think that the notion of authoritarianism, libertarianism is, not subjective? Okay, so you think that it's the economic scale. Yeah. Well, no. No. Authoritarianism. Well, anyways. I understand what you mean. It's subjective. Yeah, but I understand what you mean. The notion that right and left is subjective, or not necessarily subjective, but it is individualized depending on countries and their different political systems. That may be true, but if we're political scientists, not politicians, very different, political scientists, and we want to make a unified political theory, unified political framework to decide what is politics, right? What is mathematically statistically and objectively what are opinions and how we can define them quantitatively, because that's a real goal here. Applying math, applying statistics to politics. What do you think would be the things to consider? First of all, if we go back to the basics, is this idea of a test with questions, strongly agree, strongly disagree, agree, disagree, is that a good way of doing things? Or is there a better one?
But there should be a neutral. There were some questions where I didn't really have an opinion.
Okay. Also, guys, feel free to discussion. So yeah. You think? Okay.
Get the question
Neutral. Right. Yeah.
It would be better if there was like maybe more options before.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. But I think the problem with the neutral one would be that people would find comfort in this neutral, and essentially a neutral wouldn't add anything. Because if you think of the system here, it's a point system. So, if you strongly disagree, you get more points, strongly disagree, less points. And, yeah.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I have no opinion on that whatsoever. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not true.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I mean. I think I could.
If the enemy might be Hitler, I'm not going to be
That is true. That is true. It depends on some cases. Because these questions are very generalized.
My school buddy is a Jew.
All right, let's not get into that. What were you saying, Arthur? What were you saying? All right.
That was a question.
Okay. So that's a good point. So yeah, that's a good point. Making questions that are less general, making questions that have more. What? You just said that enemy of my friend is more general. It depends on individualized cases. So, okay, well that's a good, I think, point to end, because we just realized that essentially a few months ago we talked about the Arrow's theorem of incompletude, and the political system, the perfect political system does not exist. Mathematically proved that. And today we didn't prove anything, but we kind of looked at the fact that a way not of political decision-making mechanisms, but a way to determine our political stance also seems imperfect. We know of two ways. Two of them both seem imperfect. So with that being said, for next time, we can maybe think about how to make political choice theory and political, differentiating political views more accurate, more objective, and more mathematical, because that is, I think, the next step for the future of political science, is to add more quantitative ability with it, whether through artificial intelligence or through actual scientists and researchers. We need to add this touch of objectivity. So yeah, see you all next week.